Memory is a treacherous archivist. It doesn't record events with cold, clinical precision. No, it's a sentimentalist, a curator of the heart's most desperate lies. It takes the raw, jagged shards of your past, the betrayals that left you breathless, the humiliations that burned like acid, the moments of pure, unadulterated pain, and it patiently, over years, smooths their edges. It polishes them into neat, manageable little stones it labels the good times. They're comfortable to hold, these stones, easy to pocket and carry around as a comfort, a reminder that it wasn't all bad, but they are a lie, a beautiful, dangerous, soul-corroding lie. I am writing this now to break those stones. I am forcing myself to pick up every single sharp, ugly fragment, to feel each cut anew, to remember the exact shade of crimson it drew from me. This is not a memoir. It is an exorcism, a public flogging of my own naivety. Because if I don't, I will relapse. I'll find myself staring at a crack in the ceiling at 3 a.m., a stupid, wistful smile on my face, caressing one of those smooth, deceptive stones, remembering the way her laughter could light up a room, and forgetting the darkness that always followed. I need to understand what is wrong with me, why I stayed, why a part of me, a part I despise, still misses the prison because it was the only home I thought I deserved. It all began not with a person, but with an absence, the quiet, dusty silence of my grandparents' spare room. I was 20 years old, suspended in a horrible, stagnant limbo between adolescence and a manhood that seemed to be receding further every day. After high school, my parents had painted a vivid picture of a grand family migration to a sun-drenched state, a fresh start for everyone. "Don't bother enrolling in college here," they'd advised, their voices full of a certainty I clung to. "It'll just be a waste of money. Wait until we move." So I waited. I let 2 full years bleed away, each day a perfect empty copy of the last. I had no driver's license, no job, no prospects. I was a ghost in my own hometown, watching my friends move on with their lives through the hazy, curated lens of social media, their smiles from university campuses and new apartments feeling like personal accusations. The fights with my parents became the grim soundtrack of my existence. Their disappointment was a thick, sour smell that permeated the house, a miasma of failed potential. It culminated one evening in a screaming match that stripped away all pretense of civility. It ended with my mother, her face pale and tear-streaked, not yelling but whispering the words that shattered the last illusion of that life. Maybe, maybe it would be better if you stayed with your grandparents for a while. It wasn't cruelty, it was a surrender. We were all just so exhausted. So I went. Their house was a peaceful time capsule. It smelled of polished oak, old photographs, and the perpetual, gentle simmer of a pot of stew on the stove. The silence there was different. It was heavy, but it wasn't angry. They were kind, wonderfully bewildered by my generation, and they did the one tangible thing they knew how to do. They used their connections at the local church to get me a job. A nothing job, a placeholder, stocking shelves at a family-owned grocery store. But it was a start. It was a rhythm. The loneliness, though. My God, the loneliness was a physical entity. It had weight and temperature. It sat on my chest at night, making it hard to breathe. It followed me to work, a hollow echo in the cavernous, fluorescent-lit aisles. In the empty hours between my shifts and my grandparents' early bedtime, my only escape was the sterile blue glow of my laptop screen. I found my way into the fever swamps of Facebook political groups. It was a world of fierce, performative debate, a digital coliseum where I could craft an identity. Someone informed, someone opinionated, someone whose words could elicit reactions. Someone who mattered. I built a little digital citadel there with a small circle of online acquaintances who knew my arguments better than they knew my heart. It was a simulacrum of a life, a shadow play, but it was infinitely better than the echoing silence of my reality. And that's where her pixels first found mine. Sarah. Her profile picture wasn't just a photo, it was an event. She had this cascade of dark, thick hair that looked like it could tell stories of its own. And her eyes, they didn't just look at the camera, they seemed to look through it, through the screen, right into the lonely core of me. She wasn't just pretty, she was alluring. There was a confidence in her smile, a hint of world weariness and secret knowledge that was utterly intoxicating and completely alien to my sheltered existence. She was 30, a real, proper adult who had lived a life. We started talking in the comments of some political post, a heated debate about some policy that feels trivial now. Her comments were sharp, witty, and devastatingly intelligent. I felt like a freshman trying to spar with a tenured professor, and I was instantly, hopelessly smitten. Our conversations quickly escalated from public comments to private messages that would stretch long into the night. We'd talk about everything. Politics, sure, that was the gateway. But then it was music. She introduced me to bands that felt like secrets. Books. She'd quote lines that made my heart ache. Dreams. She spoke of traveling the coast, of living unafraid. She made me feel seen in a way no one ever had. She called me an old soul and said I was so mature for my age. To a lost, floundering 20-year-old, there is no more potent, more targeted compliment. I clung to those words like a drowning man to a splintered piece of wreckage. Then, on New Year's Eve, she posted a picture. It was her head thrown back in laughter, with some guy's arm slung possessively around her shoulders. The caption was about new beginnings and finally finding a love that feels like home. It felt like a physical blow to the solar plexus. The messages stopped. The digital connection we'd built, which had felt so real, vanished into thin air. I was genuinely heartbroken over a woman I'd never met, whose voice I'd only heard through a telephone receiver. I retreated, too proud and too wounded to initiate contact. I faded back into being just another anonymous, opinionated voice in the group. But Sarah was a master puppeteer, and she felt the strings go slack. A few weeks later, she cast a line, a vague, attention-seeking post in the group. How do you know when to walk away from a relationship that's slowly killing your soul? My heart, the foolish organ, leapt into my throat. Minutes later, my phone rang. It was her. Her voice was breathy, a little sad. She said she'd posted that just to see what I would say. The game was back on. The messages resumed, but the tone had shifted. It was flirtier now, more intense, charged with a new intimacy. Then came the frantic, midnight phone call. Her voice was shaky, thick with tears and what sounded like genuine panic. She told me a story so dramatic it felt ripped from a daytime soap opera. The guy from the photo, the new love, had a monstrous secret. She claimed he'd confessed to something unspeakable, and when she'd confronted him, things had spiraled into chaos. She said she'd thrown a can of beans at him in self-defense. It was all I had, she sobbed, and he'd retaliated by getting a temporary restraining order against her. My youthful white knight complex, previously a theoretical concept, roared to life. I believed every single word. She was a damsel in palpable distress, and I, from my grandparents' spare room, was ready to be her knight in shining armor. It was in the aftermath of this confession that she revealed another layer of her complex reality. She was a dancer. A go-go dancer. She was planning a road trip out to California to work at some higher-end clubs out there. And you know, she said, her voice softening into something intimate and conspiratorial, I'd really like to stop and see you along the way. You're so different from everyone else. You get me. The world outside my window, the quiet street, the manicured lawns, the predictable rhythm of my grandparents' lives seemed to shrink into irrelevance. California? Dancing? It was all so glamorous, so dangerous, so thrillingly adult. And she wanted to see me. Me. The guy who'd never been anywhere, who stocked shelves for a living. I felt chosen. Anointed. The day she picked me up is burned into my memory with the intensity of a religious experience. I was waiting on the curb outside my grandparents' house with a single duffel bag, my heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. An older, slightly battered sedan pulled up, music thumping faintly from within. And there she was. in person, she was even more stunning. The pixels didn't do her justice. She had an energy about her, a vibration that seemed to charge the very air around her. She smiled, a slow, easy smile that didn't just reach her eyes but seemed to originate from them, and my knees literally went weak. The digital infatuation that had built up over months of texting solidified in that instant into something terrifyingly, overwhelmingly real. The first few days were a disorienting, exhilarating whirlwind. She was staying in a motel about 40 minutes away, a dingy place off the highway that smelled of stale cigarettes, cheap bleach, and desperation. But to me, it felt like a palace because she was in it. On our second date, we were intimate. It was my first time. It was nothing like the clumsy, sweet, mutual explorations I'd vaguely imagined. It was rushed, intense, slightly frantic, and entirely overshadowed by the sheer, overwhelming reality of her experience, her confidence, the faint smell of her perfume, and the motel's generic shampoo. On the third night, lying in the motel bed with the neon sign from the parking lot casting alternating red and blue stripes across the ceiling, she asked me about my past, about other girls. My stomach tightened into a cold knot, with a trust that now feels like the most profound and tragic naivety. I told her the truth. The whole ugly, confusing truth. I told her about the incident in middle school with a close friend, a violation of trust that was less about sex and more about a fundamental betrayal of safety, an act that left me questioning my own body, my reactions, and my identity for years. And then, feeling the need to be completely transparent, I told her about the desperate, shame-filled Craigslist encounter years later. A pathetic, clinical attempt to answer a question that should never have needed asking. My voice was barely a whisper. I had never told anyone this. I was giving her a piece of my soul, raw and bleeding, handing her the keys to the deepest vault of my shame. The room grew cold. The playful, seductive energy that had filled the space just moments before vanished, sucked out like air from an airlock. She was quiet for a long, long time. I could hear the hum of the ice machine outside. "I see," she said finally, her tone flat, analytical, devoid of all warmth. She didn't reach for me. She didn't offer a word of comfort. She just turned over, presenting her back to me. "We should get some sleep." A chasm had opened up between us in that motel room, and I was left stranded on the other side, naked and utterly alone. A night or two later, she came back from work, quiet and withdrawn. She moved differently, as if she were in pain. She told me a customer had been too rough, had spanked her too hard on stage, that she was sore and didn't want to be touched. My concern was immediate and desperate. I told her I understood completely, that I just wanted to hold her, that her comfort was all that mattered. That seemed to be the right thing to say. But then, in a confusing, whiplash-inducing reversal, she was the one who initiated intimacy, her actions saying the exact opposite of her words. It was passionate, almost frantic, as if she were trying to overwrite the memory of the night before. The next day, she called me, her voice thick with a performative regret. "I'm so sorry about last night," she said, a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. "I don't know what's wrong with me sometimes. You're too good for me." The script was being written, and I was already learning my lines. Then she made the offer that would detonate my life. "This job in California, it's a long drive. It's lonely. Why don't you just come with me?" The question hung in the air between us, charged with the promise of escape. My life was a dead end. My family was a source of pain. She was the only exciting, real, vibrant thing that had ever happened to me. The only person who made me feel like I was more than just a lost kid stocking shelves. I saw a cross-country adventure, a love story, a future. I said yes. The road trip to West Virginia, where she had a short gig lined up, was a blur of grimy truck stops, bitter gas station coffee, and the captivating sound of her voice weaving stories. She seemed to have lived a dozen lives in her 30 years. We found a cheap, dim apartment that smelled of mildew and fried food. I got another menial job. For a few fleeting weeks, we played house. We bought groceries together. I'd wait up for her to get home from the club. It felt against all odds like we were building something real. And then the mask began to slip. Not all at once, but in terrifying, calculated increments. The first time I saw her true rage, it was like watching a demonic possession. It could come from anywhere. We could be laughing one second, watching a stupid movie on our beat-up couch, and the next, some innocuous comment, a wrong word, a misunderstood glance, would trigger something deep and festering within her. Her face would contort into something ugly and unrecognizable, her beautiful features hardening into a terrifying mask of fury. She'd scream, her voice hitting a shrill, piercing register that seemed to shred the very air in the room. She'd throw things, not at me, never at me at first, but a book, a remote, a glass against the wall. The violence was directed at objects, but the message was for me. Just as suddenly as it began, it would end. The storm would pass, and in its wake she'd collapse into heaving, pathetic sobs, her body racked with what appeared to be genuine, gut-wrenching guilt. She'd explain it away, her words tumbling out in a desperate, practiced river of excuses. "It's my exes," she'd weep, clinging to me, her tears soaking my shirt. "They messed me up so bad. They hurt me in ways you can't even imagine. I keep thinking you're going to hurt me like they did. I get so scared. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so, so sorry. You don't deserve this." And then, as if to seal the apology, to physically prove her devotion and erase the horror, she would make love to me with a fierce, desperate, almost punishing intensity. It was a potent, addictive, soul-destroying cycle. The pain and fear of the fight would be washed away by a tidal wave of passionate reconciliation. I learned to dread the storms, but a sick, dependent part of me began to crave the profound, intoxicating calm that always followed. She was, with the precision of a master tactician, systematically isolating me. When my parents, worried sick after weeks of silence, managed to track down our address and a local cop showed up at our door for a wellness check, it provided the perfect catalyst for a nuclear war. Sarah got on the phone with my mother. I could hear my mom's voice shrill with concern and confusion through the receiver. Sarah's responses started cold and defensive, then quickly escalated into something venomous and unhinged. She slammed the phone down, her entire body trembling with a performative fury. She turned to me, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. She told me my mother had threatened her, had said she'd kill her if she ever talked to her like that again. She weaved a detailed, plausible story about my mother's unhinged jealousy and need for control. Given the existing history of tension with my family, I believed her. A fierce, protective anger surged in me. How dare they? How dare they intrude on our life? How dare they threaten the woman I loved, the woman who was clearly so fragile and needed my protection? Blinded by this manufactured righteousness, I called my mother back and did the unthinkable. I screamed, I accused. I told her she was toxic, that she was never to contact me or my girlfriend again. I burned the bridge to cinders. My world, once so large with potential, now shrank to the size of Sarah's orbit. She was my sun, my moon, my entire galaxy, and I was locked in a gravitational pull from which I knew, on some primal level, I could never escape. When her car, a relic that was held together with hope and prayer, finally coughed its last breath, the already thin ice of our finances began to crack audibly. The pressure was immense, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety. The explosion, when it came, was inevitable. It happened on a drive to meet one of her many Facebook friends, a guy I was deeply, instinctively uneasy about. We were arguing about some inconsequential political topic, and her mood turned on a dime. Her words became laced with a venom I hadn't heard before, personally insulting my intelligence, my manhood. Suddenly, she swerved the car onto the shoulder, pulled out her phone, and with a chillingly calm smile called the friend. "We can't make it," she said into the phone, her voice sickly sweet. "He's being a total drama queen. Maybe another time." The humiliation was a hot, immediate flush across my skin. I stared out the window at the passing trees, silent, seething. But my silence, my refusal to engage, only poured gasoline on the fire. She started screaming at me to respond, to defend myself, to fight her. When I just clenched my jaw and stared straight ahead, she made a threat that turned my blood to ice. "If you don't answer me," she hissed, her eyes glued to the road but seeing something else entirely, "I'm going to crash this fucking car. I swear to God I will." I didn't believe her. I thought it was hysterical hyperbole, just another part of her terrifying performance. And then a high concrete bridge loomed ahead. Without another word, without even a glance in my direction, she jerked the wheel violently towards the guardrail. The tires screeched in protest. The car lurched. My stomach flew into my throat. I genuinely, for one heart-stopping second, believed we were going to vault over the edge. "Okay!" I shouted, the terror finally shredding my voice, my pride, everything. "Okay, I'm sorry, just stop. Please, just stop." She straightened the wheel as if nothing had happened. The rest of the drive was in a silence so thick and heavy you could have choked on it. When we pulled up to our shabby apartment, the fear curdled into a desperate, primal need to escape. This was beyond a fight. This was madness. Real, terrifying, life-threatening madness. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I want my savings, and I'm gone." I had, in a gesture of foolish commitment, pooled my meager savings with hers. "Wait in the car," she said, her voice eerily flat. "No." I walked into the apartment, my heart hammering a frantic tattoo against my ribs. I went straight to the drawer where we kept the envelope of cash and pulled it out. As I turned, she was there, blocking the doorway, and in her hand was a kitchen knife, the one we used to chop vegetables for the dinners we'd shared. The world narrowed to that single, sharp, gleaming point. It caught the light from the window and seemed to wink at me. "I just want my money and my stuff," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll call my parents. I'll apologize. I'll disappear from your life. You'll never see me again. Back! Away!" The words were a low, guttural command from a stranger. I stood my ground, paralyzed by a mixture of sheer disbelief and a stubborn refusal to be intimidated in my own home. "It's my money. I earned it." I said stay back. "I'll cut you. I swear to God I'll do it." The threat hung in the air, surreal and monstrous, and then she did it. A sharp, precise, shocking pain erupted just below my wrist. I looked down, more in surprise than agony. A perfect small bead of rich crimson blood was welling up from a neat puncture where the very tip of the blade had pierced my skin. It wasn't a deep or dangerous wound, but it was deliberate, calculated. The shock was absolute. This was no longer a game, no longer a tantrum. This was violence. This was real. I stumbled backward, my bravado utterly shattered. My arm throbbed in time with my heartbeat. She threw the wad of cash, my half, onto the floor at my feet. As I gathered my few things with trembling hands, I asked to use her phone to call a friend for a ride. My own was out of minutes. The performance changed again, so rapidly it was nauseating. She started to cry, huge, heaving sobs that seemed to rack her whole body. She collapsed onto the threadbare carpet. "It's all my previous boyfriends in my head," she wailed, pounding a fist on the floor. "You're not the one out to hurt me. It's them. It's always them. They're in here and they won't leave me alone." The transformation from cold-eyed aggressor to hysterical victim was so complete, so instantaneous, it was utterly dizzying. I told her it didn't matter. I texted the friend we were supposed to meet, my fingers fumbling on the keypad. "Not gonna make it." Sarah just stabbed me. It was a stark, stupid, dramatic message, but I needed to tell someone. I needed to make it real. When she realized what I'd done, the rage returned in a flash. But as I finally walked out the door, my duffel bag in hand, she lunged. Not to attack me. She grabbed my pants, pulling me back with a surprising strength. And then, in the most bizarre, heartbreaking, and psychologically manipulative act yet, she began to undress me, apologizing through her tears, using her body, her touch, as the ultimate weapon of negotiation. My resolve, my terror, my hard-won common sense. It all crumbled into dust in the face of this twisted, desperate display of need and power. I forgave her. I actually truly forgave her. I stayed. The next chapter was supposed to be our redemption arc. We decided to leave West Virginia to truly start over in a new state. We found a private rental home on a few acres of land. It was going to be our dream, our sanctuary. A neighbor with a truck agreed to help us move. Of course, he got lost on the backcountry roads. Sarah, driving on a suspended license, a fact she'd conveniently forgotten to mention, was too paranoid to go back out on the road to guide him. She sent me to the end of the long, dark, wooded driveway to wait for him like a human flagpole. I walked to a neighbor's house, the only one for a half-mile, to use their phone to try and call our lost helper. Walking back up that dark, lonely driveway, the trees seeming to press in from all sides, Sarah emerged from the shadows like a specter. Her voice was cold, flat, devoid of any of the hysterical emotion I was used to. It was the voice of absolute clarity. "My plan all along was just to use you to help me move me and my dogs," she stated, as if she were commenting on the weather. "I'm done with you. You served your purpose." The words were so calculated, so ice-cold, they felt more violent than the knife. I was speechless. I finally managed to mutter that I didn't want to play these games. If she wanted me to leave, I would. I was too tired for anything else. And just like that, the mask was back. "That was my evil side talking," she said, her voice softening back to its familiar melodic tone. She apologized, said she was just stressed from the move, said she was so happy to be here with me that this was our fresh start. The whiplash was becoming my normal state of being. I was a passenger on the world's most terrifying emotional roller coaster, strapped in tight, with no idea how to get off, and starting to suspect that the operator enjoyed watching me scream. Our new home was a beautiful lie. A quaint little house nestled on a few acres of land, surrounded by woods that whispered promises of peace and privacy. For the first few weeks, the dream felt real. We unpacked our meager belongings. The air smelled of pine and possibility. We shot targets with the gun we'd bought, the reports echoing through the trees, feeling for a moment like pioneers, masters of our own destiny. We even talked about her finding a different job, something away from the clubs. I allowed myself to believe the cycle had been broken. The storms were behind us. The calm was a trap. The first crack in the idyll appeared around the 4th of July. We had a friend over, a guy from my work. We were having a bonfire, drinking cheap beer, the flames painting our faces orange. A disagreement started over something trivial. The music, maybe, or a political comment. But I was tired. The walking on eggshells had worn me down. I didn't engage. I just looked at her and said, with the exhaustion that came from my very bones, "If you want me to leave, I'll leave. I just want you to be happy. I just want us to build a life." The words meant to de-escalate seemed to enrage her further. I gave up. I went inside and did something I rarely did. I drank. I drank straight from the bottle, trying to numb the pain of the dream dissolving yet again. If this was the end, I wanted to be too numb to feel it. I must have passed out on the couch. I woke to her shaking me. Her face was streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't want you to go." And then, as was our cursed pattern, her hands were on me, her mouth on mine, using the only language she knew to ensure I stayed. The fight was erased, not resolved, buried under a wave of physical absolution. It was around this time she introduced him into our lives. Let's call him Mark. He was a Facebook friend of hers, a 26-year-old who lived with his mother, had never held a job, and was likely on the spectrum, communicating mostly through a series of awkward, rehearsed accents, a bad redneck drawl or effeminate lisp. I found him grating and pathetic, but Sarah was insistent. She wanted to throw him a birthday party. She said he had no one else. We drove an hour and a half to pick him up. His mother dropped him off at the curb like he was a middle schooler. The party was a surreal affair. We had another couple over, friends of Sarah's from the club, We drank, we shot guns, we had a bonfire. I smoked enough weed to sink a battleship, trying to tolerate Mark's bizarre presence. At some point, Sarah, drunk and exhilarated, ripped her top off and danced by the fire, her skin glowing in the flames. It was wild and reckless, and in my stone stupor, I thought it was a sign of her freedom. Our freedom. I eventually passed out cold. I woke up hours later, disoriented. The fire was embers. I stumbled outside looking for everyone. I found them in her car. It was dark, but the interior light was on. Sarah was topless. Mark was shirtless. They were frozen like deer in headlights, a look of pure, guilty panic on their faces. "What's going on?" I slurred. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just talking. He's upset." I was too groggy, too trusting, too stupid. "You don't handle alcohol well," I mumbled. "Come inside." The thought of anything happening between her and this child was so absurd it didn't even cross my mind. She'd spent the whole night making fun of him. He slept on our couch. The next morning, she woke me up with a mischievous grin. "Let's have sex," she whispered. "So he can hear." I was weirded out, but again so desperate to please her, I went along with it. She was theatrically, embarrassingly loud. We dropped a silent, cowed Mark back at his mother's house later that day. I remember feeling a pang of pity for him. The chapter, I thought, was closed. A few days later, a storm knocked a huge tree down across our driveway, taking the power lines with it. We were trapped. As we walked down the long driveway to assess the damage, she said she'd forgotten her hairbrush in the house and wanted me to go back with her. I was frustrated, focused on the tree, and said no, I wanted to start clearing it. It was a simple refusal, a normal disagreement. It was the match that lit the fuse. Her anger was instantaneous and nuclear. She began screaming, her voice echoing through the silent woods. And then she went for the jugular. She started screaming about my past, about the traumatic incident from middle school, hurling the word faggot at me like a weapon. She told me she hated me, that I was disgusting. I was stunned into silence, trying to placate her, to get her to calm down. As we neared the end of the driveway, she hit me in the back. I turned around and she lunged at me, slashing my arm with her car key. I shoved her away, pure instinct. She fell onto the gravel. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I yelled. "We're done. Bitch, we are done." What happened next was a masterclass in manipulation. She didn't get up. She started screaming, not in anger, but in pure, unadulterated terror. A blood-curdling shriek that sounded like she was being murdered. She scrambled to her feet and ran down the driveway, still screaming, disappearing around the bend. I stood there in complete shock, my arm bleeding. I was the one who'd been attacked, yet I felt a cold dread seeping into me. Something was terribly wrong. I walked back to the house, assuming she'd cool off and come back. I waited for hours. As dusk began to fall, a new fear set in. What if she'd hurt herself? What if she'd been hit by a car? My concern for her overrode my own pain. I walked back down the driveway to look for her. I never made it to the road. 2 state troopers with rifles leaped from the bushes, screaming at me to get on the ground. I was slammed face first into the gravel, a knee in my back. I was told I was under arrest for domestic violence and abduction. They said a woman had fled to a neighbor's house, claiming I'd tried to kidnap her, and she'd fought me off with her key. They took a picture of the cut on my arm as evidence of my attack on her. My life in that moment ended. I was thrown in jail. Maximum security. I lost a terrifying amount of weight. I spent my birthday in a cold cell. The first night, a guard gave me a number saying my lawyer sister had called. I didn't have a sister. It was Sarah. After 3 days of hell, I called. She was sobbing. She told me the police had twisted her words, that she'd never said those things, that she was in agony without me. She promised to get me a lawyer, to get me out. She visited me, wrote me love letters that made me weep with their sweetness. In my desolation, I chose to believe her. This, I thought, would be her rock bottom. This would make her see. I was charged. At my bond hearing, the cops testified she was uncooperative and had been removed from the courtroom. My court-appointed lawyer argued I was no flight risk, that the victim would plead the fifth. I was released on bail. When I got out, she was there. She cried out at my gaunt appearance, holding me like a returned war hero. But in the car, I asked the question that had been eating at me. How did the police know specific, private details about me? Her face changed. "This is what I get for getting you out," she snapped. Then she confessed. She had told them I hit her. She claimed she thought the cops would just give us a talking to. The lie was breathtaking, but I was trapped. I had no money, no family, a court date looming. My survival depended on her playing the loving, recanting victim. A day before court, during a fight, she showed her hand. "You know, I could put your ass back in jail whenever I want." She immediately apologized, calling it a joke. It wasn't a joke. In court, she played the part of the traumatized, unreliable witness. She wore a graphic t-shirt, acted spacey and confused. The charges were dropped on the condition I complete anger management and domestic violence classes. As we walked out of the courthouse, free and clear, she looked at me and said, "Will you marry me?" I said yes. I actually said yes. I thought the brush with the law had scared her straight. I thought a ring, a vow, would finally make her feel secure enough to stop the cycle. For a few weeks, it did. It was the honeymoon period again. Dinners out, passionate sex. Then, the day before my first mandated class, she gave me an order. "Don't you dare tell them what really happened." When I asked how I was supposed to explain my presence, she smiled coldly. "I'll beat the shit out of that female counselor if you do." Of course, in that first session, I spilled everything to the counselor. I was drowning, and she was a lifeline. The counselor listened, her eyes full of a knowing pity. She told me she believed me. She suggested Sarah might have borderline personality disorder. She said my situation was about managing her behavior, not fixing my own. When I got back to the car, Sarah knew. She knew I talked. She stormed into the building, saying she just wanted to have words with the counselor. I sat in the passenger seat, a helpless child. She came back out, seething, but didn't hit me. The control was shifting, becoming more psychological. I got a job. A hard, physical job with long hours. I got my driver's license. I bought a cheap car. I was building a real life, brick by painful brick. Then someone stole her dog. The grief was genuine and all-consuming. It was the catalyst for her final unraveling. She started sleeping all day, smoking pot constantly. One night, as I tried to sleep after a 12-hour shift, she hovered over me. Her eyes were blank. "Demons see demons," she whispered. "I know what you are. I imagine ripping the flesh from your face and eating it. I see myself dismembering you in the bathtub." The words were so cold, so precise, they didn't even feel like a threat. They felt like a forecast. I chalked it up to grief. My caretaking instinct, my pathetic need to fix her, overrode every survival instinct I had. Then she found porn on my phone. A hypocritical rage ensued. She broke my computer cord and bought a new one that night. But the real change was her phone. It became an extension of her hand. She was protective, secretive. She started not being home when I got back from my late shifts. I'd wait for her for hours, smoking on the porch, a knot of dread in my stomach. One day, she admitted it. She was seeing someone else, a customer from the club. She said he played the daddy role really well. The confession felt like a death. I begged, I pleaded. I'd wait for her for hours, and she'd pull up at 4 a.m. saying, "I feel like shit. I don't want to do this to you. I'm in love with two people." She promised to end it. A week later, her phone buzzed while she slept. It was him. The messages were full of "I love yous" and "I miss yous." She'd lied. When I confronted her, she threatened to get a protective order against me if I contacted him. I was trapped by probation, by finances, by fear. One night after a fight, she said she needed a night to think at a motel. A dark suspicion took root. I drove to every motel in the area, a pathetic detective in my own tragedy. I found her car at one right down the road. Parked next to it was a car covered in music stickers. I knew. The door to the room was unlatched. I pushed it open. The scene is seared into my mind. Her in bed with him scrambling to put a shirt on, her scream, "Call the cops!" My own dogs confused, wagging their tails at the foot of the bed. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out, my heart not breaking, but shattering into a million silent pieces. She stayed there with him all night, knowing I knew. The next day, she had the audacity to call me. She swore they didn't have sex. She said sleeping with me now would be cheating on him. She was saving herself for their life together. I shut down. I told her I wasn't leaving the house. She could go. In a fit of pathetic revenge, I put an ad on Craigslist. When I told her I had a date, she jumped on me, hitting me in the face, screaming her hypocrisy. I didn't fight back. I just took it. I felt cleansed by her hypocrisy. She had no power left to hurt me. The final act of the circus was her sugar daddy, a short, crippled man who paid her $600 a night for private dances. She came home with bruises and finally confessed she was into BDSM. He was her daddy, her master. She was his slave, his little one. She denied sex, but the emotional betrayal was complete. She'd chosen a role, a fantasy, over our reality. When I finally threatened to leave for good, she played her last card. She told me she'd been repeatedly raped by her father as a child, that this was her reliving her trauma. It was a devastating confession, designed to trigger my sympathy and lock me in place. I needed space. I drove 500 miles to my parents to finally try and mend that burned bridge. While I was gone, she moved in with the sugar daddy for 4 days. When I asked if they'd had sex, she said, "It's none of your business." She told me I was weak, that he hits her out of pleasure. The final thread snapped. I went through her Facebook. I found old messages with Mark, the weird friend from the birthday party. My blood ran cold. I called him. He confirmed it. That night, while I was passed out, she'd had sexual contact with him in the car. She'd told him she loved me like a friend, but loved him. She'd planned a road trip with him. The timeline clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She had put me in jail right when she was planning to run away with him. She had married me, all while holding the secret. The woman I had given my life to, gone to jail for, forgiven for stabbing me, was a complete and utter fabrication. I confronted her with this final, ultimate betrayal. Her response was the last thing she ever said to me that felt true. "I'm sorry you ever crossed my path. I'm not going to change." The words were a release. They were the key. The prison door swung open. I filed for divorce. The process was a dull administrative blur. The love didn't vanish overnight. It had to be mourned like a death. I mourned the dream, the future I'd fought so hard for. I missed her, the good version of her that I'd built in my head. But the stones were broken now. I could only feel the sharp, painful edges of the truth. Therapy helped me understand the patterns, my own codependency, my savior complex. It took years to stop flinching at raised voices, to trust my own perceptions again. I never found out if her stories of childhood abuse were true. In the end, it didn't matter. Her pain was real, perhaps, but her choice to wield it as a weapon was hers alone. I learned that love shouldn't feel like a war zone. It shouldn't require bail bonds and survival strategies. It shouldn't leave scars on your skin and your soul. I was not dumb for loving her. I was human. But I was a fool for believing love meant destruction. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is walk away and never, ever look back.